The moment I opened my eyes, I knew I wasn't supposed to be alive. The words pulsed in my skull like the aftermath of a nightmare. Except when I blinked, the nightmare didn't end. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, the faint scent of burnt coffee clung to the air, and the cheap beige carpet scratched at my heels. I knew this place, the small conference room at Hayes Capital, the same one where I'd nervously perched on a plastic chair 8 years ago, waiting for my very first orientation. The air was too cold, the table too shiny, the notepad in front of me stamped with the company's logo. But it couldn't be. Because the last thing I remembered was fire. Screaming. My chest crushed against a seatbelt as an airplane tore itself apart over the ocean. Before that, lawyers handing me divorce papers, my husband's signature, written with the same precision he once used to caress my skin. My husband, Adrian Hayes, the man who'd once promised me the world, and then locked me in the smallest corner of it. The man who smiled for the cameras and made me smile at his side, even as he erased me piece by piece. And yet, here I was, back where it had all begun. I dug my nails into the notepad, testing the reality of it. The paper crinkled. Real. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or maybe both. The door opened. And just like that, the nightmare walked in. Adrian Hayes, 8 years younger than the last time I saw him, though still devastatingly composed. His suit was tailored so sharply it looked like it might cut him if he moved too quickly. His hair, dark and neatly styled, caught the overhead light. His jawline could have been carved with the same ruthless precision as his business deals, and his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, landed on me. "Anna Calloway," he said, glancing at a folder in his hand before returning his gaze to my face. "Our new associate." My lungs forgot how to work. I knew that voice, deep and smooth, the one that used to whisper promises in the dark before it turned cold and commanding. Hearing it now, fresh, untainted by years of cruelty, was like standing at the edge of a cliff, dizzy with the possibility of falling again. "Yes," I managed. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He studied me for a beat too long, as if trying to memorize the shape of me. Then he smiled. That smile, the one that had made me believe once that I was the only person in the world who mattered. "Welcome to Hayes Capital," he said, his hand brushing against the back of the chair beside me. He didn't sit. He never did, not unless he was in absolute control of the room. My stomach twisted. I remembered too well the way that smile faded, how those eyes turned cold, how his hand eventually held someone else's waist with the same easy confidence. But that was then. This was now. The weight of the second chance pressed against my skin. I wasn't the timid 26-year-old desperate to prove herself anymore. I was 34. I had loved and lost, fought and failed and died. And come back. I laced my fingers together under the table to stop them from trembling. "Thank you," I said, meeting his gaze head-on. His eyebrows lifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected eye contact from me. Good. Let him wonder. For the next few minutes, he outlined the expectations for my role. His words were clipped, efficient, but I wasn't listening to the details. I already knew them. I'd lived them. I remembered the late nights, the endless reports, the way I used to stay just to catch a glimpse of him leaving his office, as if proximity were a form of affection. Not this time. This time, I wasn't here to orbit around Adrian Hayes. The moment he left the room, the air shifted. I exhaled, pressing a hand against my chest. My pulse was still a runaway drumbeat, but underneath it, something steadier was rising. Resolve. In the last life, I'd given everything to him, my time, my loyalty, my heart. And he had turned me into a shadow, then discarded me like one. I lifted the notepad, staring at my name written on the cover. The letters blurred for a moment before sharpening again. Not this time. This time, I wasn't going to be his shadow, his convenient muse, or his broken wife. This time, I would choose. And if Adrian Hayes thought he knew the rules of the game, he was about to learn I wasn't the same player anymore. "On this board, Adrian," I whispered to the empty room, "you're not the only one moving the pieces." The bullpen gleamed like a showroom for ambition. Glass walls, steel desks, monitors. glowing with streams of numbers that could decide the fate of entire companies. Phones rang in clipped tones, heels clicked against polished marble, and the hum of urgency filled every corner. In my first life, this floor had terrified me. I'd slipped through it like a ghost, too timid to make noise, too desperate to prove I deserved to be here. This time, I walked in with my head high. "New girl," one of the junior associates muttered as I passed. His tone was half bored, half predatory. I didn't bother acknowledging him. I'd learned that attention, once given, was too often treated as permission. I found my desk, identical to a dozen others, white surface, dual monitors, a headset tangled like a trap. The familiarity of it almost made me laugh. I had lived here once, sacrificed evenings and weekends to it, and for what? To be invisible. Not this time. Anna Calloway, isn't it? I turned. Mrs. Carter leaned against a filing cabinet like it was a throne. She was older than most here, late 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled into a sharp bun, glasses perched low on her nose. Her mouth carried the permanent twist of someone who had seen empires rise and fall, and never once been surprised. "Yes," I said. She studied me like she was checking for counterfeit. Then she smirked. "Try not to drown. This place eats eager girls for breakfast." I smiled back, sharp enough to cut. "Good thing I'm not here to be eaten." Her eyes flickered with amusement, though she said nothing more. It didn't take long for the first test to find me. A stack of reports landed on my desk with a thud. One of the senior analysts, Greg if I remembered right, didn't even look at me. When he said, "Double-check these projections before the meeting with Hayes." In my old life, I'd have nodded silently, grateful for the chance to be useful. Now, I flipped through the pages with deliberate calm. The numbers jumped out at me. A decimal misplaced, an assumption overstated, a projection that would crumble under the slightest pressure. I looked up. "These figures are wrong." Greg finally turned, blinking as if a chair had spoken. "Excuse me? The projected ROI on the Hayworth account is inflated. You assumed a market growth of 12%, but the last 3 years barely cleared 6. At this rate, you'll be lucky to break even." Silence. Heads turned. A junior analyst's pen froze mid-scribble. Greg's face flushed red. "Are you questioning my work?" "Correcting it," I said, voice even. "Unless you want Mr. Hayes to be the one pointing it out in the meeting." The words slipped out sharper than I'd planned, but the satisfaction of watching his jaw tighten was worth it. Whispers rustled through the office like dry leaves. The new girl had just bitten back. Of course, Greg wasn't about to take the humiliation quietly. "You think you know more than people who've been here for years?" I met his glare without flinching. "I know numbers. They don't care how long you've been here." A door opened behind us. "Is there a problem?" The room stilled. Adrian Hayes stood at the threshold of his glass-walled office, his presence slicing through the air like a blade. Greg straightened so fast his chair nearly toppled. "No problem, sir. Just reviewing projections." Adrian's eyes flicked to me, then to the report still in my hands. "And?" I held his gaze. "They're off. If you want investors to trust the Hayworth acquisition, the numbers need to reflect reality, not optimism." A dangerous silence followed. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Interest, faint but undeniable, sparked there. Finally he said, "Fix them." His tone left no room for debate. "We don't deal in fantasies." Then he disappeared back into his office, door clicking shut behind him. Greg muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue. He yanked the reports from my hand, cheeks still blotched with humiliation. I returned to my desk, pulse racing, but I refused to let it show. This time, I wasn't going to shrink. Across the room, Mrs. Carter tilted her head, watching me with that half-smile again. She spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Well, well," she murmured. The girl's grown teeth. "Interesting." I let myself grin, just a little. Because for the first time in years, maybe in both lives, I felt alive. The ballroom glittered like money made tangible. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors, violins hummed in the background, and waiters drifted through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes that sparkled like captured stars. Men in tailored suits shook hands as if signing treaties. Women in sleek dresses traded smiles sharp enough to draw blood. Hayes Capital's annual investor gala. I remembered this night all too well. In my first life, I had clung to the edges of the room, trying to look competent while keeping my voice low. I had thought blending in was survival. I hadn't realized that silence could kill faster than speaking up. Tonight, I didn't intend to be silent. "Anna, my name," said like a command. I turned to see Adrian approaching, glass in hand, the crowd parting without him asking. His tuxedo was immaculately cut, black fabric hugging broad shoulders, silver cufflinks gleaming at his wrists. He looked every inch the man who owned the room. "You're early," he said, eyes scanning me with a flicker of surprise. My dress wasn't extravagant, just a simple navy sheath. But I wore it like armor. "I like to watch the players before the game begins," I replied. His lips curved, just barely, but the amusement in his eyes betrayed him. Before he could respond, a voice rose across the room. Too loud. "Hayworth's projections are fantasy." The words crashed through the gala like a cymbal. Heads turned. Glasses stilled mid-air. My stomach clenched. I remembered this. Mr. Dorian, one of the secondary investors, had too much champagne that night. His public outburst had sent reporters sniffing around, denting Hayes Capital's credibility for months. It had nearly sunk the Hayworth acquisition. In my old life, I had done nothing but watch. Tonight, I moved. I crossed the floor before Adrian could. Dorian was flushed, tie askew, eyes glassy. "They're lying to us," he snapped, and I could feel the crowd drawing in, waiting for the drama. I reached his side, my hand light on his arm. "Mr. Dorian," I said warmly, pitched just loud enough for those nearest to hear, "you're absolutely right to be cautious. In fact, Mr. Hayes asked me to personally assure you we'll be adjusting the projections to reflect the most conservative estimates. We'd rather underpromise and overdeliver than the reverse." The words slipped out smooth as silk, though my heart pounded like a war drum. Dorian blinked at me. The aggression drained from his face, confusion taking its place. "He asked you?" "Yes," I said, lowering my voice to a confidential murmur. "He respects your insight more than you know. You've always been right about the markets, haven't you?" His chest puffed. Just like that, I'd given him the dignity he'd been flailing for. "Well, yes, I have." "Then let's talk numbers tomorrow, in private," I said. "Tonight, enjoy the champagne." He hesitated, then nodded, mollified. A waiter swept in as if on cue, offering another glass. Dorian took it, grumbling softly. But the storm had passed. When I looked up, the crowd had already dispersed, pretending the interruption hadn't happened. But Adrian was watching me. His expression was unreadable, except for the glint of something new in his eyes. Interest. He crossed the room slowly, as if savoring the moment, and leaned, just close enough that I could feel the quiet weight of his voice. "You handled that as though it were your stage, wasn't it?" I asked lightly. His mouth twitched again, a ghost of a smile. But there was sharpness there too, a question he wasn't voicing. "Who are you really?" Before I could answer, another voice slid between us. "Well done," someone drawled. "Michael Lawson, senior analyst, smooth as silk, sharp as a scalpel." His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit a deep charcoal, his tie the exact shade of crimson that said, "I know I'm dangerous, and I enjoy it." He offered me his glass in a mock toast. Most people would have let Dorian crash and burn. "You, Miss Calloway, turned it into theater." "It wasn't theater," I said, though my lips curved. "It was damage control." "Same thing," Michael replied, eyes gleaming with amusement. "And you did it beautifully. I'll be watching you." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a warning. I held his gaze for a beat before turning back to Adrian. He was still staring at me, his jaw set, his eyes dark with a question I wasn't ready to answer. For the first time that night, I felt the game shifting, not behind the curtain but in plain sight. And I wasn't just a pawn anymore. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, a soft blanket against the cold glass and steel world I'd been navigating all week. Wooden tables glowed under warm pendant lights, couples leaned close over lattes, and the background hum of laughter felt almost unreal after the sharp edges of Hayes Capital. I spotted my sister before she saw me. Lily sat at a corner booth, scrolling on her phone, a caramel frappuccino already half melted beside her. Her hair was styled into glossy waves, nails lacquered pale pink, her coat draped over the seat like she expected the world to wait on her. Some things hadn't changed, Anna. She looked up, beaming, the kind of smile that used to undo me completely. Finally. I was starting to think you forgot about me. I wouldn't, I said, sliding into the booth opposite her. Lily leaned across the table, eyes sparkling. So, how's the new job? Is your boss still impossibly gorgeous? I bet you're already his favorite. Her words, light and careless, twisted like a knife. In my old life she had adored Adrian from afar, always teasing me about my storybook romance with the man in the corner office. She had no idea that story had ended in ash. I forced a smile. The job's fine. She pouted dramatically. Just fine? Anna, this is your chance. You can finally do something big, and, She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Help me out a little. There it was. I almost laughed. Not at her, but at the inevitability of it. In my first life, this conversation had played out again and again. Tuition bills. Credit card debt. Rent, when she didn't want a roommate. I had carried her burdens like they were my own, telling myself it was what a good sister did. And each time, I'd folded without a fight. This time I inhaled slowly, the smell of cinnamon grounding me. What do you need, Lily? I asked softly. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Don't make it sound like that. It's just school fees and maybe a little for books. You've always taken care of me. You always say that, I murmured. She tilted her head, impatient. Because it's true. You've always been there. You're the responsible one, Anna. That's what you do. The old reflex rose in me, the urge to nod, to agree, to sign the check. But I pressed my palms against my knees, and forced myself to stay still. Lily, I said carefully. I love you. And I will always care about you. But I can't keep giving up pieces of my life to cover yours. Her lips parted, offended. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'll help, I said, steady. But not at the cost of my own future. Not at the cost of breaking myself in half so you can feel whole. Her cheeks flushed pink. You've always taken care of me. And I'll continue, I said, meeting her gaze without flinching, but not at the expense of my life. Silence fell between us, heavy as lead. Lily stared at me as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away, stabbing her straw into the half-melted frappuccino. You've changed, she muttered. The words stung more than I expected. Yes, I whispered. More to myself than to her. I had to. The cafe's warmth pressed in on me, but inside, I felt both lighter and lonelier. Setting the boundary was freedom, but freedom always came with a cost. When I finally looked up, Lily was still sulking, scrolling her phone again, the conversation already dismissed in her mind. My chest ached with the familiar mix of love and frustration. In my first life, I had been her safety net. This time, I couldn't. Not if I wanted to survive. I wrapped my hands around the mug of coffee, letting the heat seep into my fingers, and whispered silently to myself, I will take care of her, but I will take care of me first. Adrian Hayes' office was exactly as I remembered it, sleek, minimal, all sharp lines and controlled elegance. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, making everything beyond his glass walls feel smaller, less significant. The desk was a slab of black oak, bare except for a laptop, a pen, and a single stack of papers perfectly aligned. It wasn't just an office. It was a throne room. And Adrian, standing behind that desk with his jacket off and sleeves, rolled neatly to his forearms, looked like a king preparing for battle. Anna, he said, without looking up from the document in his hand. His voice was calm, measured, but something in the way he said my name made my pulse hitch. Come here. I crossed the room, heels clicking against polished floors. The last time I'd been summoned like this, In my other life, my stomach had been a knot of nerves. I'd been so eager to impress him, so desperate for approval. Not this time. He finally looked up, eyes cool, assessing. "I have something for you." He slid a folder across the desk. "The Harrington account. They expect a full analysis and revised proposal on my desk tomorrow morning." I opened the folder. It was a monster. A labyrinth of numbers, conflicting projections, and vague notes. It was the kind of assignment that had kept me chained to my desk overnight years ago. One I'd failed spectacularly, leaving Adrian disappointed, and Greg, the senior analyst, smug for weeks. Tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours. It wasn't possible. At least, not for the girl I had been. "Is there a problem?" Adrian asked. Watching my face, I snapped the folder shut. "No problem." His eyes narrowed just slightly, as if he'd expected me to flinch. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Good. Let's see what you can do." In my old life, I'd taken this task as proof he believed in me. I hadn't realized it was a test, designed to break me or mold me. But this time, I had 8 years of scars to guide me. The hours bled into night. I sat up in one of the smaller conference rooms, papers spread across the table like battle maps. I didn't waste time trying to reinvent the wheel the way I had before. Instead, I built a strategy: break the task into pieces, prioritize the data that mattered, and ignore the noise. I remembered how the Harringtons thought. They hated risk, loved conservative estimates. So I adjusted the models to reflect cautious projections, not flashy gambles. By midnight, the reports started to take shape. My eyes burned, my wrist ached from typing, but I kept going. Somewhere in the early hours, I allowed myself a grim smile. He thinks he's playing chess. But this time, I know the rules too. The next morning, I walked into Adrian's office, hair pulled back, documents in hand. He glanced at the clock. 8 sharp. "You're early," he said. "I'm finished," I replied, placing the neatly bound report on his desk. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face: surprise. He flipped through the pages quickly, scanning the models, the notes, the recommendations. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him. They gleamed with interest. "This is thorough," he said finally. "Conservative, but realistic," I added. "Exactly what the Harringtons want." He looked at me, long and hard, as if weighing me against some invisible scale. Then he closed the folder, tapping it once against the desk. "Well done." The praise was subtle, almost reluctant, but it landed like a shot of adrenaline. In my first life, I would have basked in it. Now, I simply inclined my head. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, a voice stopped me. "Well, I'll be damned." Mrs. Carter stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "You actually did it, and you don't even look like you're about to collapse." I smiled faintly. "Wasn't that hard?" She laughed, sharp and warm at once. "You can take a hit, girl. I'll give you that." Adrian said nothing, but when I glanced back, his eyes hadn't left me. And in them, I saw it again. That flicker of curiosity, sharper now, edged with something I couldn't name. Walking out of his office, exhaustion finally tugging at my limbs, I allowed myself a private thought. Last time, I had been a pawn. This time, I was something else entirely. The cafe was the kind of place that thrived on being seen. Exposed brick walls, industrial light fixtures dangling low, baristas who looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. It buzzed with mid-morning energy, suits from downtown towers lining up for espresso shots, conversations humming over the clatter of cups. Michael Lawson sat by the window, as if he'd been waiting all along. He wore a charcoal suit and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a man who treated charm like another currency. "Anna," he said smoothly, rising as I approached. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." "I don't forget easily," I replied, sliding into the chair across from him. "Good." He leaned back, fingers tapping idly against his coffee cup. "Because I think you and I could help each other." I studied him for a beat. Michael was everything a senior analyst was supposed to be: intelligent, confident, with a reputation for turning numbers into gold. But beneath the polish was something colder, more calculating. In my first life, I hadn't recognized it soon enough. He'd fed me half-truths, convinced me I was protecting myself when really I was protecting him. And by the time I saw it, the damage had been done. Not this time. "What makes you think I need help?" I asked. He chuckled. "You're good, Anna. Better than I expected. I saw what you did with Dorian at the gala, and the Harrington report." He whistled softly. Impressive. Compliments, easy and practiced. He knew how to dangle them like bait. "But," I prompted. His smile sharpened. "But Adrian Hayes isn't the man you think he is. Brilliant, yes, charismatic, absolutely, but ruthless. He doesn't care who gets trampled as long as he wins. And you," he leaned in slightly, voice dropping, "you're too bright to be someone's pawn." The words were almost identical to the ones he'd used in my other life. Back then, I'd believed him. Back then, I'd wanted to believe someone saw me as more than Adrian's shadow. "Go on," I said carefully. Michael sipped his coffee, then set it down with deliberate precision. "I have information. Numbers, deals, things Hayes wouldn't want anyone else to see. If you and I worked together, if we positioned ourselves correctly, we could outmaneuver him, secure our futures, not just survive in this place but own it." I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse spiked. Information. I knew he wasn't bluffing. Michael always had a file or two tucked away like loaded guns. In my old life, I'd followed him down that path, thinking it would save me. Instead, it had made me a traitor in Adrian's eyes. And when Adrian turned on me, Michael had vanished, leaving me to take the fall. "Interesting," I murmured. He smiled, mistaking my caution for intrigue. "Think about it. Adrian plays chess, yes, but even kings can fall if you take away their board. With your brains and my leverage." His eyes gleamed. "We could run the game." For a moment, the hum of the cafe faded, replaced by the echo of my past mistakes. I could almost hear my old self agreeing, leaning into his promises, desperate for escape. Not this time. I lifted my coffee cup, letting the steam curl against my face, and said evenly, "I'll think about it." Michael's grin widened, satisfied. "That's all I ask." We talked a little longer, about nothing that mattered. He was careful, never revealing too much, just enough to lure me closer. When I finally stood to leave, he touched my arm lightly, the gesture calculated. "You're smarter than the rest, Anna. Don't waste it." I walked out into the crisp air, his words clinging like smoke. Inside, my thoughts twisted. Michael Lawson was dangerous, ambitious enough to burn anyone in his way, clever enough to make you thank him for the fire. But he had something I needed: knowledge, leverage. The trick would be taking what he offered without stepping into his trap. I tightened my coat around me, staring up at the glass tower of Hayes Capital rising against the sky. Adrian thinks I'm still learning the game, I thought. Michael thinks he can recruit me into his. But this time, I'll play both of them. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel had been transformed into a stage. Rows of chairs filled with journalists and analysts stretched toward the platform where microphones gleamed under bright white lights. The backdrop bore the Hayes Capital logo in clean, confident lettering. I sat at the edge of the stage, one row behind Adrian and the senior partners. The room buzzed with the rustle of notepads, the clicking of pens, the whir of camera shutters being tested. It was the sound of sharks circling. This was the day Hayes Capital was set to announce the Hayworth acquisition. In my first life, the announcement had gone sideways. One of the partners, nervous, defensive, had stumbled under pressure, and the journalists had smelled blood. The headlines afterward had been brutal, shaking investor confidence for months. I had done nothing then. Just watched. Not this time. Adrian entered to a burst of flashes, his presence commanding the room instantly. Black suit, silver tie, his stride smooth and certain. He shook hands with the Hayworth executives, then took his seat at the center of the table. Cameras snapped as if he were royalty. The conference began. Questions volleyed, answers delivered with rehearsed polish. For a while, everything ran smoothly. Then came the stumble. One of the partners, Mr. Green, adjusted his glasses nervously as a journalist fired a pointed question about long-term risk exposure. His answer came out shaky, full of corporate jargon and contradictions. A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters smelled the weakness, the inconsistency. It was happening again. If the press seized on this, the deal would unravel before it was even signed. My stomach clenched. Before Adrian could cut in, I rose. My heels clicked loudly against the stage as I moved toward the microphone stand reserved for internal commentary. It was a risk. An associate didn't just insert herself into a press conference, but I knew what had to be done. "Excuse me," I said, voice clear. All eyes turned. My throat went dry, but I forced myself to keep going. If I may clarify, the strategy isn't about reckless expansion. It's about calculated stability. The Hayworth acquisition allows Hayes Capital to diversify its portfolio and reinforce its conservative strengths. The projected risks have already been accounted for, and mitigation measures are built into the contract. The room stilled. I looked directly at the journalist who had asked the question. In other words, the growth here isn't about chasing a fantasy. It's about ensuring predictability in an unpredictable market. The words landed like a stone dropped in water. The murmur shifted tone. No longer hungry skepticism, but grudging acknowledgement. Pens scratched across notebooks. A few heads even nodded. Mr. Green exhaled in relief. The crisis had been diffused. I stepped back, my pulse hammering, and caught sight of Adrian. He was watching me. Not annoyed, not even surprised. Interested. When the conference ended and the crowd dispersed, Adrian rose from his seat. Instead of heading directly toward the cameras, he turned to me. "Miss Calloway," he said, voice pitched for the reporters nearby to overhear. "That was very well put. Thank you." The words hung in the air like a declaration. Cameras flashed again, capturing him looking at me with something close to approval. Heat shot through me, sharp and confusing. My chest tightened. For a split second, I wasn't the woman who had come back from death, full of resolve. I was the younger version of myself again, the one who had ached for his attention. Our eyes locked, and my heart betrayed me. It skipped, stuttered, and surged. Damn it, I thought. My body remembers him even when my head screams run. I forced myself to nod politely, nothing more, and slipped away from the spotlight as quickly as I could. The buzz of journalists covered my retreat, but I could still feel Adrian's gaze burning between my shoulder blades. Later, as I sat in the quiet of the hotel lobby, I clenched my fists in my lap. He was dangerous. Michael Lawson was dangerous in one way, but Adrian was worse, because Adrian didn't need to lure me with promises. My heart had once chosen him without hesitation, and even now when I knew better it still reacted as if nothing had changed. But things had changed. I had changed. And if Adrian Hayes wanted me to play on his stage, I would. But on my terms this time. The city lights glittered beyond the glass walls of Adrian's office. A sea of neon and steel stretching into the night. Inside the room was silent but for the faint hum of the HVAC, the kind of silence that didn't soothe. It prowled, restless, waiting to pounce. I stood just inside the door, the adrenaline from the press conference still simmering in my veins. Adrian leaned against his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened but not discarded. He looked less like the polished CEO, and more like the man beneath, the one I'd once thought belonged only to me. His eyes, sharp and gray, tracked me the way a predator tracks movement in the dark. "Where did you learn that?" he asked at last, voice low, measured. "Those instincts." That answer today, it wasn't luck. I steadied my breathing. I read the reports, I listened. It wasn't that complicated. He tilted his head, unconvinced. "Don't lie to me, Anna. You cut through that room like you'd been doing it for years." Because I had, I thought bitterly. 8 years of playing your shadow taught me exactly how to manage a storm. But I only shrugged lightly. "Maybe I'm just a quick study." He pushed off the desk, closing the space between us in deliberate, unhurried steps. No. That wasn't just quick thinking. That was strategy. His gaze pinned me in place. "You're not the same Anna Calloway I hired." I lifted my chin, refusing to flinch. "Then you never knew me at all." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, Not even surprise, but intrigue. Dangerous intrigue. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The office felt smaller, the night pressing against the glass as if the whole city leaned closer to listen. "You're bolder than I expected," he murmured, almost to himself. "Or maybe you just underestimated me," I countered. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, not yet. "Careful. Underestimation is something I rarely forgive." I crossed my arms, heat prickling along my skin under the weight of his stare. "Then, I suppose it's fortunate I don't need your forgiveness." That did it. A laugh, soft, disbelieving, escaped him. He studied me like a puzzle, tilting his head as if trying to glimpse the answer from a different angle. The tension between us shifted, tightened. It wasn't the easy charm he displayed at galas, or the cold authority he used in boardrooms. This was different, raw, unfiltered. "You're playing a game," he said, stepping closer still, his voice dipping lower, "meant only for me. And I don't know the rules yet." My pulse kicked hard, betraying me. "Maybe," I said evenly, though my throat tightened. "You're not the only one allowed to play." His eyes darkened, a storm gathering. For a heartbeat, I thought he might close the distance completely. My body betrayed me further, heat rushing through me, heart hammering in a rhythm I didn't want to acknowledge. Damn it. My body remembers him even when my mind screams run. He stopped just short, close enough that I caught the faint scent of his cologne. Clean, expensive, sharp with cedar. "Not the same Anna," he repeated softly, almost like an accusation. I forced a smile, cool and steady even as my insides tangled. "Or maybe you just weren't paying attention." The silence stretched, taut as a wire. And then, finally, his mouth curved into a smile. Not the polished, practiced one he used on investors. No. This was different. Sharper. Real. The kind of smile that promised danger, the kind that said he'd just found a worthy opponent. And God help me, it thrilled me. The office floor was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving the hum of printers and the faint glow of desk lamps behind. I slipped into the break room, grateful for the momentary escape. The night pressed against the tall windows, making the world outside look distant and unreal. Mrs. Carter was there, of course. She always was. She sat at the small round table with a cup of tea, her glasses perched low on her nose as she scrolled through something on her phone. When she noticed me, she set it down and gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit," she said. "You look like you've gone 3 rounds with the board." I sank into the chair, pressing my palms against the lukewarm paper cup of coffee I'd brought with me. "Something like that." Her eyes twinkled knowingly. "It's the boss, isn't it?" I hesitated. Mrs. Carter had been around long enough to read everyone in this company like a ledger. She could sniff out secrets before you knew you had them. "He's different than I expected," I admitted carefully. She gave a short laugh. "That man is nothing but differences. He keeps most of them locked up where no one can see, but I've been here long enough to know a thing or two." I leaned forward, unable to stop myself. "Such as?" Her gaze sharpened, measuring whether I was worthy of the information. Then, with a sigh, she set her teacup down. "You think Adrian Hayes was born a shark?" "No, dear. He was made into one. Once upon a time he trusted people, thought he could build something on loyalty." My heart stuttered. This wasn't the polished story of ambition he fed to the press. "What happened?" I asked quietly. Mrs. Carter tilted her head. "He was betrayed, by someone he thought was family. Cost him more than money, it cost him his faith. Since then he's been careful, cold, if you want to call it that. He wears control like armor because he doesn't trust the world not to stab him again." I sat back, the weight of her words pressing into me. Adrian? Betrayed? It was almost impossible to imagine. In my memory, he had always been the betrayer, the man who carved me down until there was nothing left. Yet now, this sliver of his past cracked the image I'd carried of him. For the first time I wondered, had we both been casualties of other people's games? Mrs. Carter sipped her tea, watching me carefully. "Don't mistake me, Anna. He's still dangerous. But people who've been broken once, they tend to break others before it happens again. That's all he's ever doing. making sure he's the one holding the blade. Her words lodged in me like a thorn. I'd seen Adrian wield that blade, and I still bore the scars. But behind the ruthlessness, was there also fear? I swallowed hard, staring down into my coffee. My reflection trembled in the dark liquid. What if we're both just victims, lashing out to keep from being hurt again? The thought unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Because if Adrian wasn't just the predator I'd painted him as, if he was also a man still bleeding, from old wounds, then the walls I'd built against him weren't as solid as I thought. Mrs. Carter reached for her phone again, her tone softer now. Be careful, girl. The closer you get, the harder it is to remember which parts are mask and which parts are real. I nodded, though inside I was anything but steady, because even now, with her warning echoing in my ears, I could still feel the memory of his smile from earlier, that dangerous, genuine smile that had looked like truth. And I hated myself for wanting to believe it. The conference room was a battlefield dressed in glass and chrome. Spreadsheets lit the walls, contracts lay sprawled across the table, and the hum of tense voices filled the air. The Harrington deal, the very foundation of Hayes Capital's next quarter, was collapsing right in front of us. Investors shifted in their seats, exchanging wary glances. The air reeked of panic cloaked in expensive cologne. Adrian stood at the head of the table, jaw sharp, voice even as he countered question after question. But I could see it, the storm gathering behind his calm facade. If the Harringtons pulled out now, the fallout would be brutal. I kept flipping through the binder in front of me, hunting for something, anything that might stop the bleeding. Numbers, projections, clauses, they blurred together. And then, a hand slid the binder closed under mine. Michael Lawson. He leaned close enough that only I could hear. His smile was a razor's edge. This is it, Anna, he murmured. You either stand with me or you'll sink with him. Choose. I froze. His words weren't a suggestion. They were a command wrapped in silk. He wanted me to side with him, to pull whatever leverage I had and help tank Adrian's position. And in my other life I had done just that, believing I was protecting myself, only to find Michael nowhere when the knives came out. Not this time. I straightened, pulling the binder back to me. I already have chosen, I said under my breath. His eyes narrowed, the smile faltering for the first time. Adrian's voice cut through the tension. Anna. Every head turned. He didn't often call on associates in meetings like this, but his eyes pinned me now, steady and commanding. Your thoughts? A ripple of surprise moved through the room. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. The Harringtons don't want risky growth. They want guarantees. Everyone here is pitching them futures, when what they really want is insurance. The room quieted. I flipped to a page in the binder and pushed it toward the investors. If we shift the proposal to emphasize the conservative projections, the stable cash flow instead of speculative expansion, we give them predictability. That's what they came for. Adrian's mouth twitched, the faintest flicker of approval. He picked up right where I left off, his voice threading seamlessly with mine. Exactly. What Miss Calloway is saying is that we lead with strength, not promises. Harrington has always valued consistency. They don't need fireworks. They need bedrock. Together, we laid it out. He handling the broad strokes, I reinforcing with precise details. Back and forth, point and counterpoint, like we'd rehearsed it. Except we hadn't. We were simply aligned. The investors leaned forward, interest sparking. The skepticism in their eyes softened. And then Mr. Harrington himself, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, finally nodded. This, he said slowly, tapping the binder, is the first realistic proposal I've heard all day. Relief crashed through me, so suddenly my knees almost buckled. Adrian inclined his head smoothly. Then I suggest we proceed. There was a murmur of assent around the table. Papers shuffled, contracts slid back into neat stacks, and just like that, the crisis had turned. The deal lived. Michael sat rigid beside me, his jaw tight, his hand fisting under the table. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. His silence was its own defeat. When the meeting finally adjourned and the room began to empty, Adrian lingered. I gathered my notes quickly, ready to escape before he said anything. But his voice stopped me. "Well done, Anna." I froze. Slowly, I turned. He stood close now, his eyes darker than usual, but softer too. "You kept your head when others didn't. You didn't wait for permission. You moved." The words sank into me like a brand, hot and confusing. He wasn't praising me as a subordinate. He was acknowledging me as an equal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was charged, humming with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I managed a quiet. We both did. Something flickered in his eyes again. Curiosity, danger, maybe even pride. "Perhaps," he said. Then he turned and left, his figure disappearing into the glass corridors of Hayes Capital. I stood there, binder clutched to my chest, pulse still racing. For the first time, we hadn't been adversary and subordinate. We'd been partners, equal players on the same board. And the thought thrilled me more than I dared admit. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and headlights, reflections rippling across the tinted windows of Adrian's car. The leather seat beneath me was cool, the air faintly scented with cedar and steel, like him. We had just left the hotel where the Harrington deal had been sealed. The victory should have left me giddy. Instead, I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, pulse still, drumming from the way we'd moved in perfect tandem at that table. Beside me, Adrian drove with one hand resting on the wheel, the other loosely draped on the console. His profile caught the glow of passing streetlights, sharp jaw, steady mouth, the faint crease of concentration between his brows. He looked calm, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts filling the silence. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost contemplative. "You were extraordinary today." I glanced at him, startled. Compliments from him were rare, and this one was unguarded. "You gave them what they needed," he continued, eyes still on the road. "Not what they asked for. That's not instinct, that's experience." I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay even. "I read the room." His mouth curved slightly. "You didn't just read it, you owned it. And that's what puzzles me." The car slowed at a red light, casting us both in a wash of crimson. He turned his head then, studying me with unsettling precision. "You move like someone who's lived this before. Like someone who's already played this game once." His gaze narrowed. "You feel as though you've lived a second life. Who are you really, Anna?" The question hit me like a blow. My throat closed, words clawing to escape and dying before they reached the air. Because he's right. He couldn't know how right. But still, his words pressed against the truth I was hiding, the truth no one could ever believe. I forced a small laugh, brittle around the edges. "You make it sound like I'm a spy." His eyes didn't soften. "Maybe you are. Or maybe you're something else entirely." He leaned back as the light turned green, but his gaze lingered. "Either way, I can't decide if I should be wary of you, or impressed." I looked out the window, desperate for the distraction of passing buildings, but my reflections stared back at me, pale, tight-lipped, a stranger even to myself. Inside, my body betrayed me. My chest ached, my skin prickled, my pulse skittered like a trapped bird. He was too close, too perceptive, too dangerous. He sees too much. He always did. And yet, under the fear, another current pulled at me. The memory of standing beside him at that table, of his voice threading seamlessly with mine. The taste of what it felt like to be his equal, not his shadow. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. Don't forget who he is. Don't forget what he did to you. But my body had its own memory. The rhythm of his voice. The heat of his gaze. The way my heart leapt when he said my name. "Anna," he said quietly, almost testing the sound. I turned, caught in his stare again. For one dangerous heartbeat, I thought I might tell him everything. About the betrayal, the crash, the impossible second chance. About how I'd come back to rewrite the ending. But the words stayed locked behind my teeth. Instead, I forced a smirk. "Maybe I'm just better at this than you expected." The corner of his mouth lifted, though his eyes stayed searching. "Maybe." The rest of the ride passed in silence, thick and heavy, charged with unspoken truths. When he finally pulled up outside my apartment, he cut the engine but didn't move. The city hummed around us, muffled through the glass, while inside the car the air was taut, fragile. "Rest," he said at last, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Tomorrow will be another war." I opened the door quickly, needing the cool night air like oxygen. But as I stepped out, I felt his gaze follow me, searing against my back. And in that moment, one thought echoed through me, loud and merciless: he's too close. Too close to the truth. And too close to me. The main conference hall at Hayes Capital was packed, a sea of dark suits and bright ambition. Glass walls reflected the tension. Microphones lined the long table, and the hum of conversation carried the bite of gossip. It wasn't just another meeting. It was theater, with every player waiting for the chance to seize their moment. I sat near the front, pulse steady despite the storm I knew was coming. The Harrington victory had shifted things. My name was circulating now, whispered in hallways, printed in emails. Too visible, too fast. And people like Michael Lawson thrived on turning visibility into a target. Right on cue, Michael rose to speak. "Mr. Hayes," he began smoothly, his eyes cutting sideways toward me. "Before we proceed, I'd like to raise a concern." The room quieted, eager for blood. Michael's smile was all charm, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Our newest associate has been unusually active, taking the spotlight in press conferences, speaking out of turn in negotiations. Some might say she's less interested in supporting Hayes Capital, and more interested in manipulating outcomes for her own benefit." A ripple ran through the crowd, whispers, narrowed eyes, pens scratching. He'd done it perfectly. Dressed the accusation as concern, painted me as dangerous without getting his hands dirty. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, another voice chimed in. "Anna." I froze. "Lily." My sister stood near the back of the room, looking out of place among the tailored suits, but her expression was all too familiar, expectant, pleading, entitled. "Tell them the truth. You've always helped me, always put me first. You wouldn't betray me, would you?" The air tightened. My sister, dragged in like a pawn, whether by Michael's suggestion or her own desperation, I didn't know. Either way, she was here to paint me as reckless, untrustworthy, too bound by personal ties. And for a heartbeat, the old instinct tugged at me: defend her, shield her, sacrifice myself. Not anymore. I stood slowly, the scrape of my chair echoing louder than it should have. Dozens of eyes tracked me. My palms tingled, but my voice came out steady. "Let's be clear." I looked first at Michael, letting my gaze slice through his polished calm. Manipulation would mean hiding mistakes, playing games to win power at someone else's expense. What I've done is take responsibility when others faltered. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the problem isn't me. His jaw tightened, just enough for me to see it. Then I turned to Lily. She flinched, unused to being addressed under so many watchful eyes. "You're my sister. And I love you. But I will not," my voice sharpened, stronger than I expected, "let anyone, even you, use me to their advantage. Not anymore." Her face fell, shock flashing into anger, then something wounded, but I didn't look away. Not this time. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes when truth carves through pretense. And then Adrian rose. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The room shifted with him, every gaze snapping to the man at the head of the table. He adjusted his cufflinks, smooth and deliberate, before speaking. "Enough." His voice was calm, but it rolled through the hall with the weight of a gavel. He let the word linger before continuing. "Miss Calloway has done exactly what I expect from my team. She thinks, she speaks, she acts. She does not wait for permission to do the right thing. If some of you interpret that as manipulation, perhaps you're simply not used to competence when you see it." A murmur ran through the hall, but no one dared contradict him. Adrian's eyes flicked briefly toward me, then back to the room. "She is not a pawn. She is my right hand." The words landed like a thunderclap. My chest tightened, breath catching. For the first time he had named it openly. Not shadow, not subordinate, not convenient assistant. Partner. The meeting moved on, but I barely heard it. I sank back into my chair, heat prickling at the corners of my eyes. Around me, the whispers shifted, from suspicion to reluctant respect. Michael sat stiff, lips pressed thin. Lily disappeared into the back, her figure small against the glass. Inside, a strange calm spread through me. This victory wasn't stolen or hidden. It was mine, earned, undeniable, seen by everyone. For the first time, I wasn't surviving the game. I was playing it. And I was winning. Adrian's office was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city outside the glass walls. The skyline glittered, but inside the room the light was softer, dimmer, as though even the building knew what was about to happen wasn't meant for the public eye. I stood near the desk, hands resting lightly on its polished surface. The room felt heavy with the echoes of everything that had led us here. Every clash, every glance, every moment we'd tested each other and refused to yield. Adrian stood by the window, shoulders squared, hands buried in his pockets. The city's glow traced the sharp lines of his profile, but when he finally turned to me, it wasn't the mask of Hayes Capital's CEO that I saw. It was something rawer. "I want you," he said simply. The words landed between us like an earthquake. No preamble, no careful phrasing, just the truth, laid bare. My breath caught. In my first life, his confessions had never been gentle. They'd been declarations, demands, chains disguised as devotion. "You are mine." Words that had once thrilled me until I realized they meant erasure. But this was different. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, as though crossing a dangerous line. His eyes never left mine. "I want you," he repeated, voice quieter now. "But if you walk out of this office tonight, if you decide you want nothing to do with me, I won't stop you." The silence that followed was deafening. He was giving me a choice. In my old life, he never had. He'd pulled me into his orbit until I forgot I had one of my own. But now he was leaving the door open, even if it killed him to do it. My throat tightened. "Why?" Adrian's jaw clenched. He exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh but too bitter to be one. "Because I've spent years holding everything so tightly that it all eventually broke. If I hold you the same way..." He shook his head. "I'd rather lose you than destroy you." Something cracked inside me. I had spent so long preparing for his cruelty, his control. I wasn't ready for his honesty. I thought of the woman I'd been before, the shadow at his side, the pawn sacrificed in someone else's game. I thought of the crash, the fire, the second chance fate had dropped into my unwilling hands. And I thought of the last few weeks. The moments we'd stood back to back fighting for the same goal. The flashes of respect, the glimmers of humanity beneath his armor. My heart pounded against my ribs, too fast, too loud. This time, I am not his shadow. This time, I choose. I took a step toward him, then another, until we stood close enough that I could see the strain in his expression, the hope he didn't dare put into words. "I'm not the same Anna you remember," I said softly. "And I won't be swallowed whole again." His eyes searched mine, gray storm clouds brimming with unspoken promises. "I wouldn't ask you to." The last thread of resistance snapped. My hand lifted, trembling, and brushed against his sleeve. A small, fragile touch, but it anchored me. "I'll stay," I whispered. "But not as your shadow. Not as your possession. As your equal." The words hung in the air like a contract, binding us more tightly than paper ever could. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile curved his lips. Not the polished smirk of the boardroom. Not the dangerous grin of a man playing games, but something unguarded. "Real. Equal," he said, like he was testing the weight of it. "Then God help anyone who tries to stand in our way." I let out a shaky laugh, a mix of nerves and relief. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of myself. Because the choice was mine. And I had chosen him. The ballroom shimmered under golden light, crystal chandeliers scattering brilliance across polished marble. Laughter rose above the swell of a string quartet, champagne glasses clinked, and the air was thick with the scent of wealth and power. Another Hayes Capital gala. But this time, it felt different. I stood near the center of the room, surrounded by colleagues and investors. Their smiles no longer edged with condescension or suspicion. They greeted me not as a newcomer, not as a shadow, but as someone who had earned her place. Their nods carried respect. Their eyes carried recognition. For once, I didn't shrink under the attention. I let it wash over me like sunlight. Adrian was beside me, immaculate as always in a black tuxedo. But he didn't stand in front of me the way he once had, eclipsing everything. He stood next to me, steady and silent, his presence undeniable yet not consuming. We were partners now, in more ways than one. He bent slightly, his voice pitched low so only I could hear. "You're enjoying this?" I smiled into my champagne. "Maybe I am." His mouth curved, almost amused. "Good. You should." I looked around the room, the glittering crowd, the polished smiles, the whirl of a world that had once swallowed me whole. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a stage, one I had chosen to stand on. In my chest, a thought unfurled, quiet but powerful. In my last life, I let fate decide for me. This time, I choose. The weight of it settled into me. Not heavy but liberating. Every decision that had brought me here, the boundaries I'd set, the risks I'd taken, the truths I'd spoken, they were mine. My victories, my scars, my second chance. Across the room, Mrs. Carter approached, moving with the steady confidence of a woman who had seen too many stories play out, and knew exactly how they ended. She carried a glass of wine in one hand, her eyes twinkling with the same sharp humor that had unnerved me from the beginning. "Miss Calloway," she said, giving me a once-over that was part appraisal, part approval. "You clean up nicely. Didn't think you'd survive this circus, but here you are, stealing the spotlight." "Not stealing," I said lightly. "Earning." Her gaze slid to Adrian, who was still watching me with that steady, unreadable expression. Then, with a sly smile, she added, "Well then, Mr. Hayes, looks like you don't stand a chance anymore." A ripple of laughter bubbled from me before I could stop it. Adrian arched an eyebrow, the barest trace of mock offense touching his lips. "Don't encourage her," he told Mrs. Carter, though his voice held amusement he couldn't disguise. "Oh, I intend to," she said, raising her glass in a toast before disappearing back into the crowd. The moment hung between us, warm and strangely light. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I laughed. Not out of politeness, not out of relief, but freely. Adrian's eyes softened as he watched me, and in that look I saw the truth of the choice I'd made. Not surrender, not submission. A choice, mine, wholly and entirely. I set down my glass, turning toward him fully. The music swelled, couples spun across the dance floor, and the night glittered with possibility. "I think," I said, lips curving, "this is the start of a very different kind of contract." His answering smile was quiet but certain. One we both sign. And for the first time in 2 lives, I felt like I wasn't walking into someone else's story. I was writing my own.